I'm sitting here with a very important lady. Her name is Miss Kamey Butler. She is from New York, and she project managed the entire Cape Town Art Fair, which was a successful and amazing event. So I'm very curious about her. What happened? You know, how did you do all of this? Because she really pulled it off, and I'd like to know a little bit more about her background. And yeah, I think it's going to be very exciting.
Well, thank you, darling. Let's see, where to begin. As far as my background, I studied theater and film production at the University of Miami in the US. And from there, the first project I worked on was a project for Spike Lee called The Summer of Sam. So I worked on the production crew with that. I was about 17, 18 maybe when I started working in film. So I worked on that, and I was also on the development team of the movie called The Best Man, which now is coming out with its sequel, finally, after all these years, called Best Man Holiday. So that releases in the States at the end of this month. So that's really cool to see it come full circle. So I started off working in film when I was very young, and my mom was a fashion designer, so I had a really big interest in fashion. And my dad was a big business guy in the States. And so I eventually wanted to work in the fashion industry, so I started working as a men's agent in Miami. So I represented models for fashion, for commercials. One of the biggest models that I worked with and started was Channing Tatum. He's a huge actor in the States. A lot of people may know who he is. So I started working with him when he initially started his career. So it was amazing to kind of watch his development up to this point and where he is. And when I left Miami, I moved to New York, and I became the director of Ford Models. So the international modeling company Ford. I ran their commercial division and managed over 150 models for about 5 years, and worked with a lot of amazing people who've gone on to be great actresses and models, and worked in the industry for a while. And then after I did that, I went on to be a producer. So I produced beauty and fashion advertising. And I worked again with great stylists and photographers and shot all over the world and traveled. I was doing about 300 shoots per year for about 5 years in New York. And literally constantly either in studio, in office, or on location. So I was pretty much always on the go, but just had to troubleshoot and make anything happen at the last minute, which was awesome. But always being around creative energy was a huge necessity in my life. But I just kept moving around. It was, you know, when I was working in film and then working in fashion and then producing. And then September of 2012, I just decided I needed a break from my life in New York, 15 years into my career, and I just decided to come to South Africa to continue writing a book that I had started. So I came for 6 months, and because I'm always drawn to creative energy, I would always find myself at studio visits or gallery openings or just meeting artists on the street and just kind of writing about their story and my experience with being here. And I remember October last year, I was sitting with a really influential person in the art world here, and I said, you know, why isn't there a Cape Town Art Fair? Why isn't there a fair here? It just makes sense because it's such huge culture of artists, and they should definitely be represented. And it just kind of sparked the idea. I've been a big person of, if I put an idea out into the universe, it eventually actually happens. So that was October of last year. Probably the next month, I met the people that run Fier Milano Exhibitions Africa, who put on the Cape Town Fair this year. And just so happened to be in the right place at the right time. And they were working on an art show, and they wanted someone to run it. And I had no experience in working with fine art, but you know, my background is in creative aesthetic and in production. So if you know what looks good and you know who should be involved, that's really all that matters. All the logistics in between typically can work themselves out. But you know, I pride myself in putting together a great team of the right people to make something dynamic happen. And my interest for art in South Africa started in 2010. 2010, I was flown here by a big fashion company that wanted me to head their office here in South Africa. And that was my first trip, but I'd always had this affinity towards the country because of working with, you know, huge models like Candice Bouchier, who's from here, who's, you know, internationally acclaimed. And throughout my fashion career, I had just always wanted to come to South Africa. So 2010 I came, fell in love with it, and I fell in love with this piece of art when I came here. I eventually received it as a gift, commissioned from the artist. He did a personal painting of me, which is quite funny. So I received that, and at the time I was working with a charity called Starfish Great Hearts Foundation.
Okay.
I was volunteering for them in the States.
I've seen your ad. It's very like Starfish into the ocean.
Yes, exactly. So they're a South African-based charity, but they fundraise in New York and in London. So when I got back to New York after that trip in 2010, I wanted to somehow be involved with the country. So I started volunteering for this organization in the States. Just so happened they were putting on an art auction in like 4 months. And I said, oh cool, that may at least help, and I'll volunteer my time.
Yeah.
When I received the commissioned painting from that guy, I thought...
Tell us who he is, though.
So his name is Dion Cupido.
Okay.
He's with World Art.
Oh, great.
And it's such a funny story. So anyway, so I received his painting, and at the time he was at the Good Hope Art Studio that used to be at the castle. And I wrote him right away and said, listen, I'm working on this art auction in the States. I'd love to show your work here and get some work from other artists that you work with. They were so keen. We eventually got about 18 pieces from South Africa sent for the art auction that was happening in March. Just 2 weeks away from the auction happening until when I got in touch with them. Anyway, they sent over their pieces. Dion's pieces went up against a Jeff Koons artwork in the States, and his went for more money than the Jeff Koons piece. And at that moment I just realized, wow, okay. I always knew I had an eye for art, but I didn't really test the South African-New York transition.
Yeah.
So that was my first introduction to wanting to introduce South African artists to the States.